get right into the news. We'll start with the Ukrainian MOD's claims of losses today. There is not much going on today. You can see how the weather, the cold and the wet, is starting to slow things down already. In the last 24 hours, according to the Ukrainian MOD, we saw the Russians lose 1 tank, 3 APVs, and 14 artillery pieces. That's about the lowest we've seen in months since the counteroffensive began. I would remind everybody that today is day 625 of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. And in the continuing saga of the degradation of the Black Sea Fleet, today the Ukrainian MOD confirmed with geolocated video footage the destruction of 2 small landing ships. Now, guys, let's remember what these landing ships are and why they're important. A landing ship is a ship that's used to transport men and cargo across the Sea of Azov from mainland Russia or across the Black Sea from mainland Russia. These things can handle tanks. Now, the 2 that were hit today are smaller landing craft. Maybe they can take a tank or 2 and 300 soldiers. But they can also be used to move fuel trucks. Hey, Parda's here. Hey, Parda. Thanks, Parda. They can also be used to move fuel trucks, equipment, food supplies, fresh water, etc. Everything you would need if you needed to resupply Crimea while it was under siege. Putin is so aware of the need for these ships. If you Google naval news for February 8th, 2022, more than 2 weeks before the full-scale invasion began, there is an article there that will tell you that a Kilo-class submarine entered the Black Sea that week, as well as 6 additional Rapucha-class landing ships, which are bigger, mid-sized landing ships than the 2 that were destroyed today. Now, why is this important? It's important because Putin knew he was going to war. He knew he was going to need to move men and machines across the Black Sea and across the Sea of Azov. And so what he did was he doubled the number of landing ships that were in the Black Sea right before the war began. And this is important because once the war began, the Montreux Convention goes into effect, and you can't bring any more warships into the Black Sea. Turkey shuts it down, right? So they went from having 7 landing ships in the Black Sea to 13 right before the war. Now, according to British and American intelligence, 2 of those landing ships were not seaworthy. So they effectively had 11. The Ukrainians had taken out 5 of them. So that leaves you with 6. And today they lost 2 more. That brings the Russians down to just 4 landing ships. Now, if I'm right, and the Ukrainians are in a position to destroy the Kerch Bridge and to cut the land bridge to Crimea before the first of the year, before winter really sets in, and put Crimea under siege, you're going to need those landing ships, boy. You're going to need them. And they're down from 13 to just 4. That's a big deal. And it is evidence that Ukraine continues to fight and win the deep battle by degrading the Russians' ability to conduct warfare. Amateurs talk about tactics. Professionals talk about logistics. And the Russian logistics are degraded every single day. We see it over and over and over again. Yesterday, one other thing about this. I swear to God. These 2 ships, the video is very clear. They were taken out by Sea Baby drones, right? These are surface drones that come along the surface of the water and impact. They have a pressure detonator on the front of the thing, and they impact the ship, and that blows them up, right? That's how these ships were taken out. We know that because we've got the video footage. It's all over the internet for anybody that's interested in that kind of thing. Only here's the thing. Before the Ukrainian MOD released the footage, the Russian MOD announced that there had been a drone attack on Vuska Bay, which is where these ships were, and that all the drones had been shot down and had not hit any targets. The Russian MOD said that the drones had been shot down. That means that they didn't even know what kind of drones hit those ships. That's what it means. Or they didn't bother to take the time to find out before they released a press statement saying, nothing was hit, we shot everything down, everything is fine, nothing to see here. It's ridiculous. Now, here's a story that I didn't think we were going to get. And I hesitate to even mention it because we get a lot of disappointment in this war. But it is worth mentioning for those of you who know about Bogdan Yermokin, the 15-year-old that was kidnapped from his family in Mariupol, sent to live with a Russian family, ran away a bunch of times trying to get back to his family in Ukraine, and who was just served conscription notice into the Russian army to fight for the Russians against his own people. There is word that he's going to be returned to Ukraine. The president's office released a statement today. His lawyer released a video. If this is true, this would mark a great win. So please, everybody, keep Bogdan in your thoughts. Now, with him, another 30 children were kidnapped from Mariupol. We have no word on any of them. In addition, there are tens of thousands of children who are likely captive in Russia right now. But every single one of these kids that can be returned to their families is a win. Is a win. The German government today released plans that they say are documents leaked from the Kremlin that describe Russia's plan to subvert the sovereignty of Belarus and reincorporate it into the Russian Federation by 2030. There's an action plan for subverting the military, subverting economics, subverting the political establishment, so that even if Lukashenko is no longer in power, Belarus will fall under the aegis of Moscow. There are hints in this plan that similar plans exist for the Baltics, for Poland, for Moldova, Transnistria, and of course, we are well aware of Russia's plan to devour Ukraine as we see it every day as the Russian war machine continues to grind eastern Ukraine into digestible bits. The ISW reported that an endemic flaw in the Russian military, that is, one in which commanders must only report good news or see themselves demoted to the front line, or worse, sent to a psychiatric institute, as we saw with the recent demotion and detention of the commander of the Dnipro forces who refused to send his men on suicide missions. This problem that the Russians have of needing to soothe the egos of the command structure back in Moscow, rather than paint an accurate portrait of what's happening on the battlefield, is leading to the production of maps that are tactically irrelevant to the actual situation on the ground and are costing the Russians lives. The ISW reports that examples of these maps have been found on captured Ukrainian prisoners, and that they are not reflective of actual battlefield conditions, which could be why, as I was reminded tonight by Effenhell, in Solzhenitsyn's August 1984, the Germans retreated and left the phone lines up so that they could listen in on Russian communications. And then the Germans would take the phone lines down so the Russians didn't know where their own men were and would end up shelling them. It's possible, because these maps are wrong, that some of the friendly fire incidences we've seen could be the results of this failure of communication. Absolutely. The president of Kazakhstan is my new favorite former Soviet bloc president. Today, at the summit of former Soviet states, he greeted the Russian delegation in his native Kazakh, not in Russian. It was the most beautiful thing I've seen in a long time. Watching Putin or his double or whoever this person is, and all of the Russian delegation scramble for their translation headsets and stick them in their ears because the president of Kazakhstan delivered his opening remarks and his entire speech in Kazakh. And to me, now that says a lot of things. A cornerstone of Russification, of the process of extending the Russian Empire, is killing off native languages and replacing them with Russian. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we have seen a renaissance of Ukrainian in Ukraine, and people are not speaking Russian. In the Baltic states, we've seen moves not to outlaw Russian, but to stop funding schools that don't teach in the native languages, that only teach in Russian. That's over now. If you're a state school in Estonia, you teach in Estonian. If you're a state school in Latvia, you teach in Latvian, etc. All up and down. One of the cornerstones of Putin's plan to take over Belarus was the elimination of the Belarusian language, which Lukashenko is down for. He's down for that. And all schools in Belarus are currently teaching in Russian. That will change after the revolution. What I think we're seeing is an end of the Russian language as an influence in Central Asia and Eastern Europe. That's gone. It's going away. In Avdiivka, the reports keep coming in that the Russians have assembled a force of at least 2 brigades with as many as 40,000 men and equipment to try to take the chemical plant just south of the slag heap. In a video today, I detailed why the Russians holding the slag heap does them little to no good. Because the chemical plant itself is at a higher elevation, and the Ukrainians have now put machine guns up on top of that plant. There's concerns about anybody hitting the plant. If you hit the plant, there's at least 10 tons of benzene, aluminum sulfur, or sulfite rather, and other hazardous chemicals that, if released into the atmosphere, could easily gas every troop within 1,000 meters. That's a problem. That's a problem. And that's where the fight is headed. So I think we should be on the alert for this big push of the Russians and potential hazards caused as they attempt to take this plant. Taking the plant is clearly their goal. It gives them access to control all the roads for resupply into Avdiivka from the north. And that's what they're after, to cut off those supply roads. In Robotyne, the flanks of the wedge are expanding. And this is a great example of the dilemma that the Ukrainians are creating for the Russians, because the bridgehead down in Krinky and in Poima and in Pishchenivka is expanding. That's clear. The bridgehead on the left bank of the Dnipro down in Kherson is expanding. Guys, thanks for all the gifts. I really appreciate it. All the fire, all the roses, all the hearts and flowers and everything. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. So the bridgehead down in Kherson is expanding. The Russians are increasingly nervous about this. And so they have been forced to pull some of the paratrooper force from Robotyne down to Kherson. Thank you, Maddie. It's Peter and the Peeps once again. This dilemma has left Robotyne open to expansion. And so we saw the Ukrainians push the Russians, what's left of the 76th, out of the heights overlooking Robotyne and taking those critical heights. And now they're looking down on Kopane, they're looking down on Novoprokopivka, and they've made advances, significant advances, up to 1 kilometer in the direction of Verbove. And so we're hopeful that as the Ukrainians continue to turn these screws and create these dilemmas for the Russians, that they will be forced to move more troops out of critical positions where they are currently fixed. And that will create openings for the Ukrainians to advance. That's what we're looking at. The EU Parliament says that existing sanctions are not enough, that the Russians are getting equipment from Western countries all the time, and it's a problem, and clearly it is. However, it is important to recognize the wins, and today in a Brooklyn court, Vadim Konashenkov was arraigned on charges of trying to evade the sanctions. Now, this guy was first detained in Estonia in October of 2022. He's an FSB agent who's associated with a technology company in Moscow that's openly owned by the military intelligence of the Russian army. That's who he is. He was detained on October 27th. He was charged on December 12th of 2022 in Estonia. He was then extradited July 13th of 2023 to the United States, and today he's arraigned in a Brooklyn court. Why a Brooklyn court? That's a good question, and I'm not sure I have a good answer. However, we do know that just last week, 2 Canadian nationals with dual citizenship in Russia and 1 Tajik national with dual citizenship in Russia were arrested on similar charges of funneling about $10 million in high-end components and dual-purpose components for use in weapons manufacture inside of Russia. Could these be related? They could well be. Vadim was not the only person charged way back in December of 2022. Another 7 co-conspirators were charged, most of them living in Moscow or St. Petersburg. But one was in New Jersey and one was in Vermont. And so we've got at least 3 and then another 3, 6 members of this ring locked up in Brooklyn tonight and arraigned on charges of trying to subvert the sanctions. The reality is none of these guys might see a jail cell. They might all get traded away for Americans that are currently being held in Russian custody, unfortunately. But time will tell, we'll see. In military aid, the 3rd Patriot system for Ukraine is en route. It is on its way from Germany. And we've been led to believe that it could well be headed to Odessa, which is in such desperate need of more air support. The French announced that they are sending the Acheron 5th generation anti-tank guided missile, with a 5-kilometer range that can pierce 1,000 millimeters of armor. And also, one of the variants deploys 1,500 tungsten splinters, which will tear anything apart that's within 50 feet of the detonation. It's not a cluster munition technically, but rather a fragmentation munition. And it is deadly to troops on the ground around the target tank. Acheron. Does that name sound familiar to anybody? Where are all my Greek mythology nerds? Who remembers who Acheron is, or Acheron, or what Acheron is? I think more appropriately. Anybody? Nobody? No old Greek mythology nerds out there? Who remembers the name of the guy who ferries the dead across the river? Well, there's only nerds and punks, Maddie. So if you're not a nerd, you must be a punk. The shade Karen, or often pronounced Sharon, ferried the dead across the river Styx. The name of his boat is a Chiron. And a Chiron, the idea is it will ferry Russian troops to the other side. That's what it's for. Finally, the United States House of Representatives is, of course, completely paralyzed and in disarray and is going to shut the government down through their incompetence in just 8 days. That appears to be what's happening. So we cannot count on this Republican-controlled Congress for anything, not even the basic function of doing their jobs and controlling the purse strings. Now, what does that mean for Ukrainian aid? Well, this is the important part here. I am a mythology nerd, huge. By the time I'd finished 8th grade, I had completed all of Bullfinch's mythology, the entire thing. That's not even a joke. Anyway, look at. There's still $4.9 billion in the Presidential Drawdown Authority account. Biden can clean out the garage. He can say we're going to send unit warhead ATACMs with a 300-kilometer range. He can say that we're going to send more 155 millimeter shells. He can say. The question is he going to do it? And so, Vanetta, I think what we need a letter to the president. We need a letter to the president's office urging the president to draw down on that $4.9 billion. It's almost $5 billion, and get air defense systems and other necessary systems to get the Ukrainians through the winter, especially since we know they're going to be targeting the energy infrastructure here. So what else can we draw down? Who's got some ideas? What could we draw down from our inventories and stockpiles that would support the Ukrainians going into the winter? Clearly, air defense is a big thing. That's a big thing. They're also saying they're short at the front on mortars. And so mortars would probably be something to add to that list. Any electronic warfare equipment that we can spare, the Ukrainians will make good use of, and it'll help get them off of the Starlink. If we've got communications devices, not electronic warfare, sorry. Magic, you're right. You're really the best, dude. Okay. So we'll touch base on that. Finetta. And guys, that's it. Those are the top lines for the day. Those are the top lines for today. We're going to open it to questions, comments, points of observation, or personal need, anything from anybody. And to the tube of you guys, I'm going to say goodnight and end the stream there. Thank you guys. Thanks for tuning in. Take care.